Hey everybody, this is Amy Berger again. I'm happy to be back talking to the Adapt Live audience for the second time. I am told that I am back by popular demand, so I'm very happy that my last video was useful, and or if not useful, then I made a big enough fool of myself that you found it funny and entertaining. So either way, I am back for your viewing pleasure. If I look down a little bit more this time, I have notes this time. Last time I just spoke off the top of my head. Hopefully this one goes as well. But yes, happy to be back with the Adapt Live audience. For those of you who don't know me, if you didn't see the first video, my name is Amy Berger. I am a ketogenic, low-carb, and paleo-oriented nutritionist and writer. I am the author of the book, The Alzheimer's Antidote, which is about using a low-carb or ketogenic style diet as a nutritional intervention for Alzheimer's disease, cognitive decline, and other forms of cognitive impairment. But today, I am not talking about Alzheimer's for once, so it's actually very nice to not be talking about Alzheimer's for once on a podcast or a video. What I wanted to talk to you today about is what I call keto sense and nonsense. If you could read some of the emails that I get from clients and prospective clients, the anxiety is palpable. I can feel it radiating out of their emails. And part of that comes because we have, some of us inadvertently, some of us deliberately made low-carb and ketogenic diets sound so much more complicated and so much more complex and difficult than they really are. And, this way of eating, whatever you call it, low-carb, ketogenic, paleo, banting, whatever you like to call it, this way of eating is supposed to make your life better, not worse, right? This way of eating is supposed to make your life easier, not more difficult. And when we allow ourselves and others to be convinced that this way of eating is so complicated and so difficult and has so many layers to it, then we do the opposite. And I really, truly cannot tell you, how many people I've heard from that are just paralyzed with fear, with anxiety, with confusion. I'm sure you've all heard that term paralysis by analysis. This has got to stop. Bottom line, we're putting ourselves into a hole here that we don't need to be in, and it's not serving anybody. So before I get into it, I have to sort of lay the groundwork and give you some introductory information so that you don't come away with the wrong impression here, okay? I said I am a low-carb, ketogenic-oriented nutritionist. Clearly, I understand and acknowledge and recognize the benefits of a restricted carbohydrate way of eating, whatever that means for you. I'm not here to badmouth that. I'm not here to disagree with that. What I am here to do is to try to set the record straight regarding these ways of eating. It's not that I don't understand how insanely therapeutic and powerful the low-carb way of eating is. Of course I understand it. I wrote a book about it. But we're turning this into something that it's not and something that it doesn't need to be. And so what I want to try to do is just correct some of the misinformation and sort of like put people's fears at rest, put people's minds at ease, and help you and help your friends, if you show them this video, help you see how easy this can be when you let it be, how uncomplicated this is when you allow it to be. So, please don't send me hate mail like, oh, you're bashing keto. I'm not here to bash keto. I'm here to bash keto myths, and I'm here to bash just completely backward, wrong information that is preventing people from taking advantage of the beautiful, powerful benefits of this way of eating. So, another little piece of introductory information here is that what I'm going to say in this video is mostly general information, speaking at kind of a high level for most people. You as an individual may be dealing with a unique medical situation or a unique genetic problem or some type of life circumstance by which some of what I say may not apply to you. So please understand that I am speaking generally, I'm speaking broadly based on my experience with the clients I've seen, based on my understanding of the research, and I am not trying to pretend like I have all the answers. I don't. I just want to clear up some of the facts that I do feel pretty confident about that I think are being misinterpreted in the keto world. So, if you are what Rob Wolf calls a unique snowflake, you may have a situation that some of what I say is not appropriate for you. So please know that I'm not discounting the fact that this isn't, correct for everybody. That's all. Because people tend to they miss the nuance, they miss the minutia, and they tend to take things very personally and very individually. So just try not to do that. Try to understand that I'm speaking broadly about restricted carbohydrate ways of eating. All right, so where are we going to start? I wrote a blog post not long ago that was intended to remind people how easy and uncomplicated low carb really is. And I specifically used the phrase just now, low carb, because I think that I love to say the phrase low carb, and I say that I'm a low carb nutritionist, and I myself follow a low carb diet, but not one that is ketogenic all the time. And there's a reason for that. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about. When somewhere along the way, the phrase low carb became a dirty phrase. It became like, passe, nobody wanted, it was old news, kind of old fashioned. Everybody wants to be keto. All you hear is ketogenic now. And that's great. Clearly there's a role for a truly strict ketogenic diet. But when we tend to emphasize keto or ketogenic rather than low carb, I really think that's driving a lot of the confusion and the fear and the anxiety over this way of eating. Because when you say ketogenic, that's what makes people think that they need to measure their ketones, they need to limit their protein, they need to load everything up with fat, and they need to make deliberate effort to remain in a state of ketosis all the time rather than just following a low carb diet, keeping their carbohydrate intake low. So, I feel like some of the low carb and keto professionals, we've done this to ourselves in using that word ketogenic just a little too much and not giving enough airtime, so to speak, to the phrase low carb. So I am low carb and proud of it. Put that on a t-shirt. So I think, so the blog post that I wrote was actually in celebration of the Atkins diet. Dr. Atkins wrote his first diet book in 1972. Over 40 years ago. And I said in that blog post, I dare say nobody has done much to improve upon it since then, in 4+ decades. Now, it's not that Atkins was right about everything or that he covered every little nuance. He wasn't and he didn't. But in terms of getting people to just get started with this, the Atkins diet had no limit on protein. Dr. Atkins celebrated people being able to enjoy heavy cream and butter and fatty meat, and there was no fear of fat, but there was also no emphasis on adding gobs and gobs of extra fat to your food in order to reach some sort of high ketone level or to be on a LCHF high diet, low carb, high fat, rather than just low carb. The big thing with the Atkins diet was keeping carbs low. There was very little to no emphasis on deliberately loading things up with fat or deliberately, restricting your protein intake. So I wrote that post because people are so confused and so overwhelmed with conflicting information about this diet that they miss the forest for the trees. They're so worried about the details and the minutia that they don't even take the biggest step, which is just getting the sugar and starch out of their diet. So, when Atkins wrote his first book, and not just the first book, for 2 or 3 decades after, in the 80s and 90s at least, There were no home ketone meters for people to measure by themselves. There were no, MCT oil was not really commercially available to the public. There was no powdered MCT oil. There were no fat bomb recipes. And people did great, right? Just by reading the Atkins book, or maybe even a long, long time ago, Banting, when he wrote his letter on corpulence that started all this, all that mattered was keeping carbs low. And people did wonderfully. Now, yes, like all these unique situations, some people here and there may have had to tweak things and change things a little bit. Of course, nobody can write a diet book that applies to every single person everywhere. But Atkins did a pretty good job, and we've sort of insisted on making it more complicated than it needs to be. And I'm not saying that there's not a place for measuring ketones or having a fat bomb or, all these things. That's appropriate in certain situations, but nobody needs any of that to get started or to stay on a low-carb or ketogenic diet. If you want to spend your money on that, if it makes your life more convenient, do it. But, that's not what makes this diet effective. What makes this diet effective is a low carbohydrate intake. So, I gotta consult my notes here. Let's talk about why and how low carb works, right? Because when we say ketogenic and people think they have to chase high ketones and they'll fast or they'll eat extra fat or do who knows what in order to have these high ketone levels, for most people, and again, remember, I'm addressing most, this is a blanket statement, for most people dealing with a metabolic issue, particularly one stemming from high insulin, whether that's going to be obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, PCOS, gout, hypertension, erectile dysfunction, all these metabolic insulin things. The reason those things improve from a low-carb diet is because of lower insulin and lower blood glucose, not because of the high ketones. If you take away nothing else from this video, take away that. The reason this diet is effective for most of those metabolic dysregulation issues is because it corrects the chronic hyperglycemia and hyperinsulinemia. So ketone molecules, whether we're talking about beta-hydroxybutyrate or acetone or acetoacetate, those ketone molecules do have signaling properties in the body. I'm not dismissing that. I'm not saying that they're not useful or they're have no purpose other than proof that you're in ketosis. They do have roles to play at the cellular level, but the presence of elevated ketones in your blood is not responsible for the vast majority, if not all, the effects of a restricted carbohydrate diet on your metabolic state. That's why if you are a type 2 diabetic or you have obesity or you have cardiovascular disease, it is not recommended, at least I personally, other practitioners may recommend, I don't recommend you to take exogenous ketones because the correction of your metabolic problem isn't coming from the ketones. It's coming from the low glucose and insulin. I know I've said that 3 times, but I've said it 3 times because it's that important. So then you won't forget it. I think the high ketones may be especially beneficial for people with neurological disorders. Like I said in my last video on Alzheimer's, maybe people with Parkinson's, ALS, multiple sclerosis, certain other issues like that. Some people also with mood or psychiatric issues, whether it's depression, anxiety, bipolar. I think a lot of that comes from correcting the glucose and insulin, but I also do think in those particular conditions, the ketones themselves are important because they're serving as a fuel, particularly for the brain and particularly for the central nervous system. So there may be a time and place for certain people to deliberately aim for high ketones or to be in a ketogenic state all the time. Most of you watching probably are dealing with the metabolic side of things, in which case that does not apply to you. What applies to you is keeping your carbs low. Let's see. So, and chasing, if your specific goal is fat loss, and I love to be careful with my language as a writer. I say fat loss and not weight loss. because you don't want to lose weight, you want to lose fat. If your main goal is fat loss, chasing high ketones, whether through exogenous ketones or through loading everything up with fat, could actually be counterproductive, because you may see the very high ketones, but you will not lose body fat. Your body's going to burn those ketones instead, or going to burn all that excess fat instead of turning to your own body fat. So the people at ketogains.com, they have a saying, chase results, not ketones. Because for most people, the ketones themselves are not responsible for those results. You can absolutely lose fat without being in ketosis, and you can actually gain fat when you're in ketosis, and I know it because I've done it. I joke about this on podcasts, but it's not a joke. It's true. It's just a funny story. I've gained weight being in ketosis because I'm kind of a mayonnaise addict. I love mayonnaise. So if I, bring a jar of mayonnaise to the table, I don't have just 1 tablespoon like is the serving size on the bottle, on the jar. I'll sit there with the spoon, and before I know it, half the jar is gone. So guess what? My urine ketone strips are darker purple than you've ever seen in your life, but I'm not losing any body fat eating 3,000 calories of mayonnaise a day on top of the rest of my food for the day. Anyway, time is ticking down. I think these videos are only supposed to be like 20 minutes. I'm already at 16 minutes here. So the point of that story is that you don't have to be in ketosis to lose fat, and you can gain fat in ketosis. So let's just talk about this a little more, because I got 2 big points to make and I'm running out of time. There is a difference between burning fat and being fat adapted and being in ketosis. You can absolutely have a fat-based metabolism and be running primarily on fat without accumulating high ketones in your blood, or without seeing ketones excreted in your urine. And we'll have to put a link to the blog post I wrote. I wrote a post detailing the biochemical process by which ketones are generated, so that people could really understand that you definitely can be running on fat, have your metabolism primarily fueled by fat, but just not be building up ketones in your body. It just doesn't work that way. Crack open a biochem book, it doesn't work that way. And so I have nothing against people measuring ketones, but let's talk about the problems with measuring ketones. Because if, I say we want to make this simple, right? Most people don't need to measure ketones. You'll know if this diet is working for you, whether you're losing fat or you're losing inches, or you feel better, your cognition is sharper, your moods are better, your acne is gone, your GERD is gone, your joints don't hurt anymore. Whatever you had, if it's gone, this diet is working, so it doesn't really matter what your ketone levels are. But if you want to measure ketones, that's fine, but I want you to be able to understand how to interpret what you see, because otherwise you're going to see a number and you're going to do what women do when we get on the scale. You're going to see a number that you don't like and you're going to have a bad day, and you're going to take that number to be the arbiter of whether or not you're a worthy human being and whether you deserve good things in your life, right? If that scale is up 1 or 2 pounds, you're just worthless and your whole life is ruined and everything is terrible, right? Of course, that's not true. I'm saying that's the thought process that many of us go through. And people do the same thing with ketones. Again, you'd be stunned if you could see the emails I get with people just radiating fear and confusion and stress over their ketone levels. So here's a little thought experiment, right? Why is it that when you have hyperglycemia, chronically high blood glucose, we take that as a bad thing, right? Your blood glucose is getting high because your cells aren't using the glucose. The glucose isn't getting into where it needs to go. But yet, when it comes to ketones, we sort of, for some reason, think that it's automatically a good thing for ketones 4, 5, 6 millimolar in your blood, right? Why? Ketone levels measured in your blood are kind of a measure of flux, right? What's being produced as what's being, compared to what's being used. I'm not saying that a high ketone level is bad, high normal, not diabetic ketoacidosis high, 4, 5, 6 high, ketogenic diet high. I'm not saying that's not good, but it's just something worth thinking about. Why are your ketone levels getting to 5 or 6? Why aren't your cells taking them up and using them rapidly? So I'm just asking the question. I'm not saying one way or the other. It's just something to think about. Now, when you see those ketones, you also have to remember that people's bodies naturally vary a lot in their tendency to just generate high ketones. Some people's bodies produce ketones much more readily than others. It's just the way it is. All of you watching, I know, can relate to this thing where two people, you and someone else, a thinner friend, a taller friend, whatever, a larger friend, could eat the exact same food in the exact same amount and do the exact same exercise. And you won't lose the same amount of fat. You won't lose the same amount of total weight. Your blood glucose will be different. Your ketone level will be different. And that's because the human body is beautiful and complex and frustrating and angering and complex for the second time. It just doesn't work quite as black and white as we think it does and as we want it to. So many things affect your ketone levels besides what you eat. Same thing with blood glucose, right? We know exercise in the acute sense raises blood glucose, but over time, it helps you manage glucose better. Lack of sleep, all kinds of things can affect glucose, and they can also affect ketones. So I just want everyone to take a breath over these ketone levels, And again, just for emphasis here, I'm not saying that there isn't an appropriate time and place to measure. There might be certain conditions that really only respond to a certain threshold of ketones, and you won't know if you're there unless you're measuring. But if you're healthy and you're fit and you're just a data lover and you like to see the numbers, I'm the dead opposite of that, which I think is why I'm constantly writing about stop going crazy with the numbers, because I'm just not wired that way. But I know a lot of you are. If you are a numbers person, then collect the data and use it as information, but don't use it as the determiner of whether you need to eliminate another food from your diet, or if you need to add more coconut oil, or need to exercise more, or it just isn't that simple. I'm trying to see if I left anything out here, because I'm at the almost 23 mark now. People want this diet to be very straightforward and very black and white, and in some ways it is. Right at the beginning I said, just keep carbs low and don't worry about anything else. If you're really truly struggling to get results, then look at some of the details. But first, just ditch the carbs. Because I hear from people that I think are skimping on protein to their detriment. They're not eating enough protein because they're afraid of it, and they're afraid of it because protein may reduce your ketone levels. But since high ketones are not responsible for the vast majority of the effect most of you are probably aiming for, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're actually in ketosis or not. I'm repeating myself. I feel like there was more I wanted to say. I think I said it all. I just thought I'd be more creative and more fun about it. So that's all. I hope that helps somebody out there, especially if you're relatively new to this way of eating. Just focus on keeping the carbs low. Don't worry about the details. All the details and all the crazy minutia are great for the professionals to debate on Twitter and for people to just hammer out these molecules and things that happen at the cellular level. But for most people who just want to feel well and have energy, maybe get some excess weight off, most of that stuff is completely irrelevant. They don't need to know it. They don't need to understand it. They need to keep things simple. So that's it for this time, I guess. Thank you for watching. My website, if you want to read some of these blog posts I've been ranting about, is tuitnutrition.com, TUIT nutrition.com. And I'm on Twitter. My handle is @tuitnutrition. And that's it. Promise me that you're going to take this stuff to heart. and you're going to eat low carb. You'll eat ketogenic if you need to eat ketogenic, but you will stop losing sleep over your ketone levels, right? Thank you. Take care.